Emergency service dispatchers, what is the scariest call you have ever gotten? A little late to the thread, and not exactly what is being looked for from the question, but I was training to be an EMT, and was on a ride along. We show up to the scene and the only thing told to us was that it was a load and go, which meant rapid transport. I find the guy and he is making a wheezing noise trying to breathe. Turns out he had a brain bleed, and was having severe symptoms of high intracranial pressure. The ride to the nearest trauma center was only about 10 minutes, but it felt like 10 hours as we just tried to keep him from choking on his own vomit. With something like that, we couldn't really do much except hope we made it in time. It was definitely a wild experience for a ride along, and the craziest part was just cleaning up all the blood and vomit in the ambulance and quickly moving on to our next call. It's definitely not something I'll ever forget in my lifetime. Not a dispatcher, but one told me that one time he got a call from a 19-year-old girl. It was late and she was new to driving, in the US. Her car slipped on black ice and went over the bridge. Her car sank in the river and she called 911 and he received it. He tried to keep her calm. Poor girl was an au pair from same country in Africa. She was crying because she was going to die in a foreign country, and to make things worse she didn't even know where she was. They couldn't find her fast enough. The dispatch even remembers her last words: "Tell my sister I'm sorry I left." This story haunts me to this day. I'm also an au pair. Au pair? An au pair is a domestic assistant from a foreign country working for, and living as part of, a host family. Typically, au pairs take on a share of the family's responsibility for childcare as well as some housework, and receive a monetary allowance for personal use. Not a dispatcher myself, but the worst call I've heard of involved two friends of mine. James was a cop that had been a 911 dispatcher before he got his badge. Al was my former roommate. After I moved out of state, he moved in with James. At the time of this story, James was recovering from an injury and took a shift at dispatch because they were short-staffed. He got a call that very matter-of-factly said, "I am going to shoot myself, please send someone to address to collect my body." He's a little freaked because that's his address. It was Al. He tried to talk him out of it and was still on the phone when Al pulled the trigger. It fucked him up for a while. Damn, that's horrible. I could not imagine the trauma after experiencing that. 911 dispatcher here for a large city. I get a little bit of everything and mostly it's BS. But one that stuck with me was something recently. A man called in frantic and it was really hard to get him to calm down. He told me his 35-year-old girlfriend was unresponsive and not breathing. I immediately started giving this guy CPR instructions and he kept screaming, I'm sorry my love." Tough morning for the guy, no doubt. It hit me that he could have been responsible, or the last thing he ever said to her was not pleasant. Never followed up on the call. In this line of work, it's on to the next one. Too busy to think about it. I have millions of people depending on me not to let the last call affect the next one. I don't know what happened other than she was a DOA. Didn't hit me until the next day. My God, that scream was deafening. All I know is there was more to the story. I could hear it in his voice. Peas. I've heard people shot in real time, parents trying to revive their dead kids first thing in the morning, but this for some reason hit me. Greater than parents trying to revive their dead kids first thing in the morning, well, that's chilling frown. There's a guy up here on the roof. He was wandering around in a daze and not responding to me. He's got his shirt off and he's sitting on top of the parking garage with his legs over the edge and he's rocking back and forth. He's covered in blood. Vehicle pursuits aren't fun either. Not a dispatcher, but when I used to work as a bouncer, I wound up calling 911 several times. Trying to remain calm for an overdose/stabbing/shooting, and in one case a brutal curb stomping, while talking to the 911 dispatcher while everyone around me was very much not calm was rough. My own life's been saved a couple times by quick and professional dispatchers, and frankly they don't get enough love or credit. God, curb stompings actually happen? Christ. That's horrible. From the last time I answered this, a woman called, screaming her head off, that she had driven into a body of water, her car was filling up with water, she couldn't open the door, she didn't know where she was, etc. Kids in the car, we're all going to die. Meanwhile I'm like her, what the fuck do I do now? Try to find out details about where she is. We know she can see a massive shopping center, but it could be anywhere even remotely close to that. Local units all fan out to the different large ponds/streams etc. It could be. Call the Coast Guard and Marine Support units to help. Try to find out what kind of body of water it is, how big it is etc. And she is just too panicked to answer any questions whatsoever. Managed to get the registration of her vehicle and that was it. Turned out she had driven into a flooded road, flooded from rain, not anywhere near an actual body of water. Absolutely zero danger of the water going past her knees. https://www.reddit.com/r/r/reddit_911_edit_7/question mark context equals 3 greater than. Well, to be fair, people have died on flooded roads. It happened here about 8 years ago and a whole family died. It was near a river, but you couldn't see it from that area. Yeah, this was not near a river, though. Obligatory, not an emergency dispatcher. I had a conversation with one once where we discussed his craziest work stories, and his was taking the call of a man who had just drowned his 2 small daughters in a lake near their house. He had to stay on the phone with this sociopath, asking him questions about the time and location of the murders, until the police arrived to take him into custody. He never did find out if they ever found the children or if either of them survived in the end. I've come into contact with a fair number of sexual predators/child molesters in my line of work, but I never had to interact with them immediately after their crimes and press them for details. It's a lot to ask of someone. I've always had a lot of respect for emergency dispatchers and the folks who run abuse, rape, and suicide hotlines. Didn't this happen in Inception? Or one of those messed up Leo movies? Shutter Island, but close enough. It is one of those messed up DiCaprio films. I worked as a jailer for a while after getting out of the Marines. We had a dispatcher who had 2 kids. Both boys, one a pos that was always in jail, the other younger, troubled and riding a dangerous line. She got the call one night that her younger son got shot twice in a drug deal gone wrong at a public park where he was playing ball. He was dead before the helicopter got in the air, most likely. The dispatch center was connected to the jail where she had to work, less than 50 yards from the man who shot her son. She was pretty tore up. All these comments are so hard to read. Not a dispatcher, but this was a local news story. A few years back there was a guy that was wanting to scrap an oil drum. When he started cutting into it, it blew up and he caught on fire. He ran down to a nearby creek to put himself out. He passed a few days later in the hospital from the injuries. I vaguely remember hearing it come over our scanner that EMS had gotten there and some pieces of his skin were sliding off. It had to have been a horrible, horrible day for everyone involved. Was a 911 operator for 10 years. Scariest is probably different than worst. My scariest was an active shooter in a high-rise. Just sitting on the line trying to give the best directions so everyone makes it out okay. And what was your worst, if I may ask? I am an emergency helicopter dispatcher, so I get calls from EMS in rural areas. First question I always ask is, what is the closest city to the scene? I swear 80% of these people do not know how to pronounce it correctly and 50% of them do not know how to spell it. One time this guy cut his dick off on bath salts. When he came to, he realized what he did and called us directly. Came to really changes the story here, but I think you meant came to. I prefer this version though. Let's call it a happy little accident. Edit Bob Ross had to listen to a guy try and give CPR to his wife after she shot herself in the face. Luckily I worked for the police and not EMS. I was just listening to make sure the gun was secured and that the man didn't do anything crazy before my deputies arrived. I still think about that call a lot. Posted this before. A 3-year-old was at a campground with her family and they let her out of their sight for 20 seconds and she wandered down to a creek and drowned. Her mom found her and her father called in. While I was getting details from the understandable distraught father, a random guy camping there was doing CPR managed to resuscitate her. I can't imagine how her parents felt, but it was like physical weight being lifted off of me. Edit, am police dispatcher. Edit 2, shitty grammar. This story simultaneously gave me nightmares and then made me sigh with relief. Thanks for that emotional roller coaster. Not EMS, but work for a domestic violence shelter that offers sexual assault services. We'll never forget talking to this one woman, and her husband came home during the call and she must have dropped the phone in the process, but then I could just hear her screaming and him yelling. That will stay with me forever, I'm sure. I really wish we had been able to get her help before that happened. That is the worst call I've had. But I find it so hard when children call, just always breaks my heart. Not a dispatcher but a paramedic. But a man called, saying his mom had severe chest pains. So we head over to their address in a hurry. However, there was no mom, just the caller waiting for us and then robbing us at gunpoint saying they were going to kill us. He just wanted the drugs, but was quite shocking still. Always going through my mind when entering some shady neighborhood. That person isn't very smart though. You have their address, right? Unless it was just a random unoccupied house they were at, but still odds are you are not going to get away with that crime. They go after people like this extra hard and when caught really throw the books at them, as they say. I work for a sheriff's office and a good friend of mine was a dispatcher. I stepped outside one day for a smoke and my buddy was standing there shaking and crying. I asked him what was wrong and he told me that he had just dispatched a call for his best friend. His friend was a former army sniper and had only been out for a few months. He was a volunteer firefighter and was responding to a house fire, rolled the truck, and had been decapitated. Guy had 5 young daughters. That's very sad. Hope the man is better. He ended up getting fired in the most epic way possible. One of the other dispatchers was the granddaughter of the jail administrator. She was young and very cute and he was kind of goofy but seriously funny. Well, they had been flirting for a few weeks and one day he just up and got fired. Come to find out, he had corrected her on something that she was doing incorrectly and she got butthurt and figured she could get him moved to another shift. What had he done? He had texted her a pic of his scrotum with the caption of "I'm nuts about you" about a week earlier. Yeah, that didn't sit well with the brass/her grandpa. Fired. I was an alarm dispatcher for about a year. Scariest I had was during the night shift. I had a woman whose alarm went off while she and her daughter were asleep. She grabbed her daughter and ran into her room and locked the door. She had a gun. The woman said she did not know why it went off and requested we dispatch the police. Protocol for the company I was with was for us to stay on the line with them while a seat neighbor called the police for us. About 30 seconds after we began the call for the police, she said the door handle was being jiggled from the outside, and stopped after a few attempts. She kept saying she was going to go out there no matter how many times I told her to stay in the room. Last 30 seconds of the call she was not responding. I hung up with her and called the police back and asked what was going on. They advised that police were on scene. Worst part about that job was not knowing what happened after we hung up. Glad I'm not there anymore. Call came in and was flagged as a frequent caller on the ass end of a very rural county. The dude was just screaming. We couldn't make out anything he was saying, but we had his address and sent every available unit we had. After a while the screaming started to die down and his breathing got very labored. He wouldn't talk to us but he just kept muttering. After a few minutes we realized he was praying. Few minutes later deputy arrived on scene. Heard him check in on scene and also had him on the line. First noise I heard was him vomiting. Turned out the dude had been working on his car and the lift collapsed. The guy wasn't under the car but was between it and a tree when the car started rolling. He was impaled on a branch and pinned between the tree and car. Dude lived. He's a quadriplegic but he's alive. First legit 911 call he ever made, and everyone took their sweet time getting there because it was usually nonsense. Who can forget the old allegory of the boy who cried car fell off the lift and impaled him on a tree? When I was younger, I applied to be a 911 operator for the city I was living in, Northern California. I got through most of their tests and interviews, which there were numerous. The pool of applicants was over 200 for about 8 positions. I got down to the last dozen applicants, then they played some recordings for us. The recording I listened to was a young girl calling 911 from inside a closet. She was crying and hysterical, saying that her dad was in the house with a gun and was going to kill her mom. You could hear the mother screaming in the background, and the operator was really calm and collected. She got the little girl to keep her voice down and whisper and tried to keep her on the line. You could hear the gunshots in the background. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I didn't want to find out what happened next, so I don't know the outcome. I knew I couldn't handle that then. I don't think I could take something like that now. ITT, all the reasons I don't have the balls to be an emergency dispatcher. Fuck. One that always sticks with me is the guy who phoned to tell me he'd shot himself in the head. He was slurring his words and sounded drunk. But no, he'd actually shot himself in the head and was dead by the time the crew got there. That was a weird one to get my head around. I also took a call from a 15-year-old kid who came home from school to find his dad hanging. So I had to basically ask him if he was cold, could he cut him down, all the usual, while this poor kid was panicking to hell. And then the kid stops answering my questions. And the dispatcher next to me gets the emergency call from the neighbors saying they don't know what's going on, but there's a kid standing in the street just screaming. I think about that poor kid a lot, and I absolutely detest his father for doing that to him, when he knew his son would be the one who'd find him. Probably the other one that stands out is the call from the woman who'd just been raped. She'd been coming home from a club, and someone had pushed through her door behind her as she unlocked it. When he left, she called me. I still remember the way she screamed when she heard knocking on her door again, and I had to yell at her to try to make her understand it was the police, and not the guy coming back. I didn't sleep well after that night shift at all. My kid's sister got a call last year from her best friend when he came home from school and found his dad unconscious and bleeding out in the tub. I'm incredibly proud of her because she walked him through putting pressure on the wounds and keeping his dad warm while she was also on another phone to the paramedics. Then when the paramedics arrived, she told her friend to make sure the back door was unlocked, and she went over and cleaned up the blood so the kid and his mum didn't have to deal with it. Your sister sounds amazing, not just in a crisis, but going back later to clean up and save the family a little extra trauma. I hope her friend and their family are doing better now too. One of the first calls I ever took. Woman calls up and asks about the process of filing a restraining order. She discusses how her boyfriend has been abusive and controlling. Mid-conversation the doorbell rings, she puts me on hold, opens the door, and I hear yelling. Guy barges in and starts beating on her, and I'm sitting there helpless listening, because I didn't have her address yet. Luckily, I did have her name, and within a few minutes we got her address and got help to her. She was pretty badly injured but lived, and he is still in jail. That call made me doubt myself and if I was in the right profession, but I stuck with it, and it has been a very rewarding, though sometimes sad, profession. I guess that's why it's a good tip to open an emergency call with the address first. I read it somewhere on the pro tips sub. That way if you get interrupted, the dispatcher can still send authorities to the location, even if it was just faulty signal. That's the standard sub. Yeah. Problem was this call came in on a business line, which also meant I got no address info on the screen. But that is absolutely right. If there is only piece of info that you can give to an operator, the address is the choice. No matter what, if we have the address we can help. My husband was one of the 6 responders who recovered the children of Chris Watts from the oil batteries he dumped them in last year. It will actually be a year next week. Jesus, that's awful. My sister works as a dispatcher. Her first week on the job, she had a man call in, saying he was going to kill himself. He told her that she couldn't do anything to change his mind, he was simply trying to let her know where he could be found. She heard the gunshot through the call. Second one, she had a little girl call in because her dad was unresponsive. She knew that CPR would likely save this man, but the daughter wasn't grown enough and didn't have the strength to perform it effectively. My sister had to tell her to leave the room, because the longer that girl stayed in there trying fruitlessly to save her father, the more scarred she would become by the experience of watching her father die. There was an accident once on a somewhat busy state road here. An older couple in an SUV pulled out onto the road without seeing a motorcyclist that was going well over 100 miles per hour. He rear-ended them, died instantly and plowed through the SUV, landing halfway through the windshield. The SUV flipped a couple times and landed on the passenger side, trapping the wife. Then it caught on fire. At my dispatch center we had 3 of us working at all times, and I don't even know how many 911 calls we instantly got when this happened. Dozens, I'm sure. After I sent the FT and they got on the way, this is a rural area and this intersection was probably a good 10 minutes south of them. Some bystanders managed to get the husband out of the SUV, but he died in the helicopter on the way to the hospital, I believe. The wife burned alive. Honestly, the worst part was right after I dispatched the FT, one of the lieutenants on the biggest police department in my county happened to be driving through there with his family and he called 911. I'll never forget how panicked and frantic he was on that call. I had never heard any of our officers like that before, let alone one of the administrators. We were pretty friendly with all of them, so it shook me up. After I hung up with him I just started sobbing. Anything I answered after 2200 during the Memorial Day tornado devastation. It started, tore through and devastated Brookville, Ohio, where I live, work as fire EMS, and is one of the many local agencies dispatch for. Scary night. Thank God for my experienced co-workers. Also sat at work and listened to the Dayton, Ohio shooting a few days ago. That wasn't very fun either. I think the most genuine terror comes from child callers. I had this 5-year-old call in that her dad was growling and wouldn't wake up. Okay, agonal breathing, probably a heart attack, scrambling to get a confirmed address for EMS, PD dispatched to unconfirmed address. Finally confirm the address and start giving directions on CPR. Nope, she will not touch him because she is scared, then bursts into tears. Luckily PD arrived just after she refused and they were able to do CPR until EMS arrived. What good is a 5-year-old giving CPR anyway? Better to have her exit the room and save herself from the memory than to ask a baby to perform something they're not even physically capable of doing. I get it, it is a big ask for such a small child, but any CPR is better than no CPR. I mean, my 90-year grandmother, who can't stand up straight and has a hard time lifting any weight, was upset the dispatcher kept telling her to move my 200 pounds grandpa to the floor to start chest compressions. She still talks about it. It happens, we ask people to do more than they are sometimes capable. Also, what the other poster said isn't far off. It's chest compressions with full body weight. BC, she is a child, usually about 9 years when a child would have sufficient body weight to do truly effective CPR. Caller, muffled voice, me, I can't understand you, what's the location of the emergency? Caller, sounding clearer, like Kermit the Frog gives address, I'm going to hang myself. Me, sir, we can help you, talk to me? What's been happening? Caller, I just want you to move my body before my family get back. Me, please, there's nothing that can't be. Crack, gargling silence. I had to stay on the line until I heard police on scene. He had a hands-free kit on. I wasn't even allowed 5 minutes break. I had a breakdown after. I can't describe those sounds. Haunts me to this day. I cannot describe the feeling of being so intimately involved in the moment of such a traumatic death. He gave his pain to me. Edit for context, suicidal calls and death were common. Part of the job. But this was so sudden, I was the last voice he heard. Also, it was 2 a.m. on Christmas Day. I was wearing a Santa hat. Looking forward to seeing my family. I had to cancel and went home, spend the day alone and shaking. I can't share this with people I know, I don't want to spread his pain further. Now I have PTSD. Yeah. Hey, you don't have to bear it alone. You can talk about it. You should talk about it. I know you don't want to spread his pain further, but perhaps if we all took a little of that burden from you, the pain can be divided into tiny little bits that each person can hold on to. It might not feel so heavy if the load is shared. My PMS are open if you want to talk to literally anyone. Stay strong, friend. Edit. Wow. I am completely humbled by the responses here. Thank you to everyone who took part in this thread, and thank you to Op for sharing your story. Coming back and reading everyone's responses brought real physical tears to my eyes, and I'm so grateful to be a part of a world with people like you guys in it. Love you all. So I took 10, went for a ciggy to calm down. The duty manager found me and told me how busy we were. I told her what had happened. I shit you not, her response was man up, she was the hardest manager. So she made me get back on the phones. The next call was a regular, called maybe 10 times a day, saying her teeth felt funny. I told her she was being ridiculous and hung up on her. An hour later the DM comes back through crying, said she'd tried to listen to the call but had to stop. Said she was so sorry. Gave me the rest of the day off. A week later I was given a written warning for telling the regular she was ridiculous. I never received counseling. I ended up having a pretty nasty breakdown and tried to kill myself and had to leave. I'm doing great now though, just finished a microelectronic engineering degree. But this still haunts me. Whenever a friend has a crisis I panic thinking they'll do something like this. But it gets better with time. Thank you for your concern. You are beautiful. My mother worked dispatch and got a call from a woman whose husband had locked in a trailer and lit it on fire. The windows had been boarded up and there was no way for her to get out. This was in the 90s, so landline and the call cut out when the cords started to burn. By the time fire and police arrived it was too late. The best she got was from a woman who was very active labor. My mom had to talk her and her teenage daughter through delivering the baby. By the time EMS got there they had healthy baby boy.